The issue of the Republic of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh is often looked at through the lens of its status as an internationally unrecognized state. People quote UN resolutions, call for territorial integrity or the right to self-determination. But I think many people out there, like myself before, don't really have a clear understanding of what that actually means, international law, and how it should be interpreted. After all, terms like international law and UN resolutions sound pretty serious, so there must be something to it, I guess, right? Otherwise, not every single news outlet out there would say those same things over and over again. So let's bring some light into the darkness, and I promise to keep it as short as the relevant points allow me to. First, what is an internationally recognized state? So, by international law, nations are called states, and for this status as a state, the entity needs to be a member of the UN and recognized and approved by its existing members. This goes for the international law term, state. But you know what makes a state? A state, regardless of anyone's recognition, also has clear criteria. And those are set out in Article 1 of the 1933 Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. It's a very long name for a convention that basically just agrees on a bunch of criteria that today also has the status of international law and is to be applied by all countries. Here's what it says on what makes a state, and that's a quote. Article 1, the state as a person of international law should possess the following qualifications. 1. A permanent population. 2. A defined territory. 3. A government. And 4. The capacity to enter into relations with the other states. So the first criteria to be state is to have a permanent and stable population within a geographical area, and there is in fact not even a minimum number required. And as an example, the Republic of Nauru, which frankly I have never heard about, had a population of 6,500 people when it became independent in 1968. When Artsakh declared its independence in comparison, it had a population of about 189,000, of which almost 146,000 were Armenians, or in other words, about 29 Naurus. This data establishes that Artsakh in fact did have and still has a permanent and stable population and therefore fulfills the first criteria of the Montevideo Convention. It fulfilled it when it declared independence in 1991, and it fulfills it to this day. The second criteria is that a state needs to be generally geographically defined, without a need for exactly defined borders though. For example, Israel and a number of other states that were created after World War II did not have their final borders defined, and yet they were admitted into the UN and internationally recognized as states. There's also no minimum for the size of the region. A good example of that is the state of Monaco with its 1.5 square kilometers of land. The Republic of Artsakh, in comparison, declared its independence in the defined territory of the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, an autonomous division inside the Azerbaijani Soviet Republic. Artsakh today covers an area of about 4,400 square kilometers, or in other words, about 2,933 Monacos. So the region has had a generally defined territory since the declaration of independence until today, and thereby also fulfills the second criteria of the Montevideo Convention as well. The third criteria is that there needs to be a government that has to have some level of control over the state and its citizens. And the government does not even need to follow any specific form or structure. The people of Artsakh elected a government for the region just 20 days after the referendum for independence. Today in 2020, Artsakh has its own fully functional government, a constitution, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a police force. Presidential and legislative elections take place regularly, constitutionally and democratically. And as I said, democracy or political freedom is not even a must. Example of this could be in fact Azerbaijan, ironically. The independent organization Freedom House attests Azerbaijan a political rights score of 2 points out of 40 in 2020. Nagorno-Karabakh, being part of the very same 2020 report, scores 13 out of 40, which could be called still a very humble score, but it could also be called 6.5 times Azerbaijan's political freedom. Artsakh maintains a stable and effective system of government since the declaration of independence. Thus, Artsakh also fulfills the third criteria of the Montevideo Convention. The final criteria for statehood is the capacity for relations with other states. This basically means that the state can act independently as a state without being dependent on any other state. And this is probably the most disputed category for Artsakh, since lack of recognition internationally makes it very difficult to interact with other states because they don't even recognize Artsakh as a state. But having an existing and effective army in place suggests the ability to defend its territory by itself. The Artsakh Defense Army was formed in 1992 and fought in the war until 1994. and successfully defended the country. In addition, Artsakh has permanent representative offices for its republic in the US, Germany, Russia, Australia, France, and some others. Finally, in the ceasefire agreement of 1994, one of the signing parties to that agreement was a representative of Artsakh, proving that Artsakh in fact has the ability to enter into international relations with other states, and thereby fulfilling the fourth and final criteria to be a state according to the Montevideo Convention. Now, what does that all mean for Artsakh? It means that Artsakh, despite not being recognized by any country, is a so-called de facto state. It has achieved all criteria of statehood and factually functions as a state. And all that is really missing is the recognition internationally and the following membership in the UN. And according to Article 3 of the Montevideo Convention, which again is to be applied by all countries as international law, quote, even before recognition, the state has the right to defend its integrity and independence. And here it goes on and, describes all the rights that are afforded to states. Again, I will link the full document down below, and that speaks a very clear language, right? It means that regardless of any sort of recognition, a state is a state and is allowed to act as a state. But then there's still the problem of international recognition by other states. And Article 6 states that, quote, the recognition of a state merely signifies that the state which recognizes it accepts the personality of the other with all the rights and duties determined by international law. Now, the problem here is that international law does not have some sort of international police that makes sure everything goes according to this law. States enforce the law among themselves, and following that logic, Artsakh could only exercise its international rights and duties if it was in fact recognized, because states can and would not enforce international law on a state that in their legal view does not even exist. And this is why the recognition of the Republic of Artsakh is so important. How does recognition work? First of all, no existing state has the duty to recognize any new state just because it reached this de facto statehood. In fact, it totally depends on the state's selfish interest whether they recognize another state or not. Recognition of a new state is a purely political decision. The earlier mentioned criteria need to be met beforehand anyway. And if one state for political reasons does not approve of the new state, it can just withhold the recognition. Sometimes it is considered how the state came to be and whether independence was achieved by use of force or by acquisition of territory or racial discrimination and so on. This is limited though by the element of self-determination, which is the principle that if the use of force is in pursuit of people's right to self-determination, it is not in fact illegal. What happened in Bangladesh in 1971 is an example, as it was created by the use of force and it was generally accepted because the people of Bangladesh were exercising their right of self-determination. Alright, so self-determination. This right is often mentioned in this conflict, usually by Artsakh making a case for their legitimacy as an independent state. And self-determination as well is a right by international law. It is in the UN Charter. Now, according to Artsakh, its people declared independence, exercising the right of self-determination. According to Azerbaijan, Artsakh's declaration of independence violates its territorial integrity, but there's more to that because the Artsakh Armenians are an ethnic people that have been living in this territory for thousands of years. And although they have lived under foreign domination for many centuries, they often had semi or fully autonomous status within those bigger empires. And the same happened when the region became autonomous within the Soviet Union as an administrative division or oblast, like I said before, within the Soviet Union. Except their rights were really limited due to the discrimination by Azerbaijani and Soviet authorities. And when they called for a splitting from the Soviet Union, it became worse. There were pogroms in the cities of Baku and Sumgait, leaving hundreds of Armenians dead and thousands displaced from their homes. Azerbaijan started economically blocking Artsakh, leaving the people without access to food, oil, and other things. Now, self-determination is legal for a population living under foreign rule and being exposed to gross human rights violations. The limitation, though, is a territorial integrity of an existing state. Now, territorial integrity is another right by international law. It refers to the integrity of borders of states, and it is too recognized by the UN Charter, and it is considered a norm. But here's the thing. Azerbaijan's claim to territorial integrity, including Artsakh, is flawed. It does not have a legal basis, and here's why. When Azerbaijan split from the Soviet Union, Soviet law dictated that in autonomous oblasts like the Artsakh region, the people retained the right to decide whether to stay in the Soviet Union or leave. And that is what Artsakh did. Azerbaijan declared independence on August 30, 1991, and Artsakh had the legal right to decide between three options: Number 1, stay in the Soviet Union. Number 2, remain part of Azerbaijan. And number 3, raising the question of their own status, which will include independence. Now, 2 days after the declaration of independence of Azerbaijan, the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic was proclaimed, freeing the way for a referendum to decide about the future of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic detached from Azerbaijan. And this was perfectly legal within the rights of the Soviet Union because it gave the people of those autonomous oblasts the right to do a referendum to gain independence. In December 1991, the referendum took place and it resulted in an overwhelming 99.98% vote for independence. Thus, the declaration of independence of Artsakh was lawful and correct. Azerbaijan did not have the right over the autonomous region because the region was given the right to decide for itself by referendum. The Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region was never part of the Azerbaijani state, and Azerbaijan has no territorial rights to this territory. Another really interesting point is that when Azerbaijan declared independence, it asked for restoration of the republic of the time from 1918 to 1920. And at that time, when Azerbaijan was Sovietized, the territory did not include Artsakh because the region was under claim from both Armenia and Azerbaijan. So even more than, Azerbaijan has no legitimacy in any territorial right over Artsakh, and the argument of territorial integrity does not offer any merit. Artsakh's independence is legal. And we have learned that Artsakh is currently a de facto state, and despite the fact that the claim of independence is perfectly justified according to international law that everybody likes quoting so much, the international community is reluctant to recognize the Republic of Artsakh. And why is that? Let's remember, state recognition depends alone on the self-interest of the international community to do so. And this, by the way, shows a clear shortcoming of the legal side of, the international community and the relations. The world, as we all know too well, generally favors finance over justice. And political ties with oil-rich Azerbaijan are certainly of higher financial value than recognizing a tiny state that, just wants to live and exist according to its afforded rights. On top, there's the pressure of involved parties such as Turkey, which, by placing itself firmly on the side of Azerbaijan in this conflict, and historically always anyway against anything Armenian, following its historical character as a politically aggressive and genocidal bully state, makes the price for independence of Artsakh even higher. Because a decision for Artsakh would automatically be somewhat of a decision against Turkey as well, at least politically. And if the Armenian people learned anything from this new escalation, it is that despite the legal invalidity of Azerbaijan's reasons for aggressions, the violation of human rights, the committing of war crimes, barbarically beheading prisoners of war, bombing churches and hospitals, despite Azerbaijan clearly and openly using lies and deception to create a media narrative by just making up stuff and posting it on Twitter and Telegram.
There was even some proofs, there were some proofs from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch that you use cluster bombs there in Karabakh. Why this? Why do you use this kind of arms?
We don't use, we defend ourselves.
Despite all of this, no state in the world has done anything substantial to save the Armenian people from the threat of another genocide, except for the Republic of Armenia itself. So I believe it is up to each one of us to pray and to pressure our leaders to take action for justice, not for dollars, to finally do the right thing. Because this is a clear case, and Armenians around the world have been voicing their concerns loudly, but they ought not to be alone. The Republic of Artsakh and its precious people have the right to live peacefully in their homeland. Because legally, as well as historically and morally, Artsakh is Armenia.